Greetings, hope this finds you well. Just wanted to make a little video about the concept of manufacturing consent. I believe that was the title of a book by Noam Chomsky and another author whose name I do not recall at this point. I haven't read that book per se, but I have heard Noam Chomsky talk about this subject as well as other people. Jimmy Dore on YouTube being one of them, and basically the concept is that the media in its current incarnation in the United States basically works as another branch of the government to push policies that are advantageous to the state, as well as limiting the range of debate that is allowed on these various media platforms, whether that's TV, radio, social media to a certain extent, print media as well. Alright, it's important to always stay hydrated. And this is a problem for a number of reasons, and it's a problem because basically a handful of news corporations, companies own all of the media that is mainstream per se, and when that happens, we're only getting this information from these select sources, and it's within a very narrow tunnel. So you're never going to really hear about perspectives on the left from mainstream media, and if you are, there will always be, talked about in a negative fashion, as well as, being more favorable to more conservative, neoliberal policies, because these big corporations benefit from, the military-industrial complex, things of that nature. So it's definitely a big problem, because if you only get your news from these mainstream sources, then like I said, you're getting fed a worldview that only fits in between this very small little neoliberal capitalist viewpoint. And then, so like I said, if you're only getting your news from, let's say, Fox or MSNBC or CNN, who have to worry about, advertisers and not pissing them off, or they lose their funding, they're not going to take perspectives or cover stories from, the left, or from, from a leftist or anarchist perspective, or whatever it may be. It's only going to be through that very small window. And if you're not able to view it through that lens, then you might accept those things as fact. And if you do have that knowledge that this stuff is going on, you might be able to kind of decipher the news that you're getting from these mainstream sources, and being able to, as well as combine that together with, other independent media sources to actually figure out what's going on. So in a way, Donald Trump is right when he calls it fake news, but that also applies to Fox News as well, because it is fake news in a sense. It's only, it's not giving you the real picture, it's giving you the real corporate neoliberal picture. It's giving you that viewpoint and not much outside of it. And if it is outside of it, it's very few and far between that you would be getting that perspective. And then if you are getting that perspective, it's usually pushed back upon very aggressively. Leftist policies as being seen as unrealistic and all that, and yet they won't point out that these so-called leftist policies are supported by a majority of Americans. And manufacturing consent can work for, a number of things. That happened leading up to the Iraq War. A lot of people in mainstream media were pushing for that, and those that were pushing against it were really came down upon pretty hard. Like, I believe it was Phil Donahue at MSNBC at the time. He came out as a vocal opponent against it, as a legal war. There was no weapons at WMDs. We don't need to be going over that, etc., etc. He was subsequently fired. And then I believe the journalist Chris Hedges was also speaking out about it at the time, and I believe he was subsequently fired from the New York Times as a result of that. So another good point that Jimmy Dore has made on his YouTube channel is that, you know, if you have these leftist or independent thoughts, you're not going to, you know, be a host on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, ABC, whatever it may be, because you don't get into that position by questioning a power and authority and the state and the military-industrial complex, and the list goes on and on. So unless you are willing to be a corporate mouthpiece for these things, then you'll either, you know, not get that job in the first place, or if you do decide to speak up, they'll fire you like they did to, you know, Phil Donahue. Even though his program was highly rated, they, you know, were probably, MSNBC was probably getting some funding from the, you know, military-industrial complex, and like, well, you know, we're going to cut that off if you don't get rid of this guy, if you don't shit-can him. So that's basically what they did, and then, you know, that got us into the Iraq War, which led to hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqis, including men, including women and children, and, you know, men as well. You know, any people dying from a useless war is not a good thing. And then, like I said, you could apply this to any topic or policy issue. These big media conglomerates are only going to share stories with a perspective, with that very narrow perspective, because it serves their interest to do that. But that's why it's super important to either realize that when you're getting news from these corporate media sources, to realize that it's being filtered to that very capitalistic neoliberal perspective, and to be able to decipher what's you know, actually going on, as well as maybe consuming some media from more independent sources. Some of my favorite ones are Democracy Now!, The Black Agenda Report, Common Dreams, Truth Out, Truth Dig. Those are some pretty decent ones in my opinion. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic of how our media manufactures consent for the state, as well as consent for, you know, neoliberalism and capitalism, just because I think that's very kind of a very insidious thing that's going on. And I don't think, well, I shouldn't say it, I just don't think everybody you know, realizes that. I have family members who watch Fox News, and they, I think, are drinking that Kool-Aid. So I mean, it's all over the place. But let's remember to be kind to each other, to the animals, to the planet, and to ourselves. Peace.